What country has the best Osu players? A question that I have been thinking about for a while, so let's do an investigation and try to find an answer. In this video, we'll compare everything from the global rankings, tournament play and earnings, and even the influence some of these players.
Bro, I think Aryn is a joyful and wholesome little guy.
Or countries as a whole have had on the community. Let's start with the global standard leaderboard and break down how many countries there are in the top 100. We all know that the top 100 players are all from around the world, but it wasn't always like this. Through the mid to late 2010s, the game was dominated by one nation in particular. That was the US. They had some of the most recognizable faces with legacies lasting to this day, and accomplishments such as Vaxe getting the world's first 1000 PP play and the USA's big win streak of 6 years in the Osu World Cup. But that's enough glazing. Let's look at the statistics of the top 100 countries as of the 21st of June 2024 and see if anything has changed. Using this graph I made, yes, I geeked out in this video, here are all the nations in the top 100. At first glance, we observe that it's extremely diverse with 32 countries. Now, I am not going to name them all, you can see them in the graph, but I will mention that the top 3 countries with the most number of top 100 players are the US in first place with 14 players, South Korea and Russia tied with 8 players, and Canada and Germany tied with 7 players. These findings are not shocking for people that play Osu. The countries I just mentioned are some of the most dominant in the tourney scene and individual play. However, that was just the standard game mode, and I wanted to quickly brush up and give an answer for those who don't play standard, so I made some more graphs for each game mode respectively. Surprisingly, the catch game mode is close in diversity compared to standard, with 34 countries. The top 3 Osu catch nations are the US in first place with 10 players, South Korea and Poland in second place with 8 players, and finally Russia in third place with 7 players. The Mania game mode is quite a bit different, with 22 countries in the top 100. However, this was interesting as 41 out of 100 of these Mania players were from South Korea, and the top 3 nations in the Mania leaderboards are obviously South Korea in first by a mile, China in second with 14 players, and the US and Philippines in third with 6 players. Finally, Taiko, with the least amount of diversity within the top 100 rankings, with only 20 countries. And what's even more shocking is that out of that 100, 57 of them are from Japan, and even 9 out of the top 10 players are from Japan. So it's no surprise that they are in first in the top 3 nations, followed by the US at second with 9 players and South Korea at third with 5 players. Taiko is basically owned by Japanese players, and using this information we can infer that there are cultural differences between game modes. For example, Taiko is most likely to be dominated by Japanese players because Taiko is basically culture from Japan. As for the diversity in standard, catch, and the lack thereof in Mania, I wouldn't have a clue, but it was still interesting to see that there was one thing in common, and that is that the US and South Korea are in the top 3 nations for all game modes. This trend helps us understand that the players from these countries are more inherently competitive. However, it is important to note that some of these players aren't completely American or the race of their country that they reside in. This can be seen by the plentiful amount of Asian players that are from different countries but reside in others. Some examples from the standard game mode are Emric and Rictagon, but I'm sure there are many others. Just something interesting to consider. Also, if we wanted to, we could use the Osu website to get the countries with the most amount of accumulated PP or total score, but it's a bit hard for me to compare these metrics, so according to the site, here is the top standard countries, Taiko countries, catch countries, and Mania countries in terms of PP. It is really interesting to see when we discuss the different types of game modes, we'll see that there are some similarities and there are some differences. However, looking at the amount of PP and measuring people's worth off of rank is not that good of a metric. So how about tournament play in terms of nations? Let's specifically look at the Osu Standard World Cup and analyze how many times certain nations have won and some notable players in these tourneys. But real quickly, this video is more focused towards the standard game mode, and I don't want to leave you other game mode players with no answers, so subjectively, the best Taiko nation is undoubtedly Japan. This is because not only is 50% of Taiko's leaderboard Japanese, but if we look at their OWC team, out of the 14 Osu Taiko World Cups, they have won 12 times, and as of now, they have won 11 years in a row. This is double the USA standard World Cup streak, but we'll talk about that later. All around very dominant, and I don't see this changing anytime soon. At this current point in time, Japan also holds the current PP record in this game mode, even though this player's account got nuked. Iriha, the rank 4 player, holds the PP record. As for the best Mania country, it is South Korea, and this is for both 4 keys and 7 keys. I didn't really mention that the game mode is sort of split up and all of the data was collected from the all category. Anyways, besides that, out of the 18 Mania World Cups, South Korea have won 12 of them, or 2/3. It's not only the Mania World Cup where they showed the most dominance. We did establish earlier that they run just a little under half of the top 100, and their top 10 consists of 5 Korean players. When compared to the standard game mode, having 50% 90% of the top 10 is a good ratio. Even the highest PP play in this game mode is set by a Korean player, Dresser. And finally, the best catch nation is surprisingly South Korea. For both Mania and Taiko, it was obvious that the country with the most top players in the top 100 would dominate. But in catch, even though the United States has the most players in the top 100, they have only won the latest 2024 Catch World Cup, which leaves us with South Korea, the nation with 8 players in the top 100, but shockingly, 4 of them are actually in the top 10. And looking at the national tourney performances, out of the 13 Catch World Cups, South Korea has won 8. Okay, with the other game modes out of the way, we still have a lot more to discuss in terms of which country has the best Osu players. Over the years, legends have come and go, and the current landscape of the top 100 is extremely diverse. I mean, our current rank 1 player, Emric, is from Australia, and the last time an Australian was rank 1 was Ayup back in 2007. Not only that, but Emric has held the number 1 spot for the most number of days compared to any other number 1 player. But how much more dominant is Australia, the country Emric represents in tournament play? If you don't know, the Osu World Cup is a country-based Osu tournament hosted by the Osu team. It takes all the best countries in the world, puts them up against each other, and showcases some extremely cool maps and talented players. From the beginning of the Osu World Cups to now, there have been 5 notable nations that have won. These are Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Poland, and the US. The nation that has won the most is the US. Currently, they hold the longest win streak for the Osu Standard National Team tournaments from 2018 to 2023. They have held that title for 6 years, which is some insane dominance. At this point, the US OWC team is looked up to as the best national team in Osu. However, recently they have been starting to slow down, getting knocked into the losers bracket and letting South Korea, another great team, get close to taking the title. Actually, let's look at South Korea real quick. South Korea have won 3 Osu World Cups from 2011 to 2013, but this was back when Cookiezi was playing, so this is basically ancient. Nowadays, it almost looks like South Korea is the most dominant national team, just falling short every single time. I mean, South Korea has some exceptional talent, but only time will tell. Maybe 2024 is their year. Poland won the Osu World Cup in 2017, disrupting the USA's record of holding the number 1 spot consecutively. Had Poland not won, the USA World Cup win streak would be 9. The funny thing, however, is that one of the best tournament players in the game is on a national team that hasn't won in years. I'm talking about Malashevsky, an exceptionally talented tournament player that absolutely destroys in show matches almost every event, however, not an OWC win in sight. As of now, Malashevsky has the most tournament badges on his profile at 42, surpassing Bubbleman. With the amount of times he wins these tournaments and show matches, you would expect him to be stacked, and he is. Actually, let's look at earnings in Osu and which nation has accumulated the most amount of money through show matches and tournament play. The top 3 individuals that have earned the most amount of money are Malashevsky from Poland with $13,456, Baksay from the US with $12,289, and Emric from Australia with $10,439. The top 3 countries here are the US in first place with $67,648, South Korea in second with $38,549, and finally Poland in third with $21,667. Basically, the US is dominating in terms of tournaments. I mean, based on OWC alone, we can see that this was the trend, but how much longer can the US hold on to this record? Other countries are starting to lock in and actually use their skill in tourneys, and it's really anyone's game to win. It's actually really interesting to see, but as of now, the US is looking pretty great. Now, how about the community's perception? To get my point across on how this affects the best players, I made a Google form with some questions that I let my viewers fill out on both YouTube and Discord, so subscribe and join my Discord if you would like to be part of more cool investigations in the future. The questions are as followed. Who is a current or ex-top 100 player that inspired you to play the game? Who do you think is the most dominant nation in tournament play? And who is your favorite national team? As simple as that sounds, the influence of a top player easily affects how they're viewed. For example, my experience with Australian players have been an influencing factor for me liking them more, like Emric mentioning my name, or a secret box being really nice and just being the GOAT. From an outsider's perspective, impressions matter, so how does the wider community think and perceive these nations? Because this whole question of which country has the best Osu players is really subjective. After removing the people that gave a dumbass response, we got some pretty interesting answers and results. For the first question, who is a current or ex-top 100 player that inspired you to play the game? There were a bunch of people listed, but using this pie chart, I hope it shows you a representation of what players in the sample like. With these results, the top 3 players are White Cat in first, BTMC in second, Vaxay and Cookiezi at a 3rd place tie. These players are from Germany, the United States, and South Korea respectively. This does fit the trend of the analysis we did earlier, which is great. But to be fair, some of these are the most popular players in all of Osu history, with White Cat being number 1 and extremely dominant in his era, BTMC being BTMC, and Vexay and CookieZ just being the OGs of Osu, Vexay holding the tourney winning record streak and CookieZ holding a lot of milestones as well. Now here's where it gets pretty interesting. Who do you think is the most dominant nation in tournament play? Using all the data, the US places first by a long shot, with South Korea trailing in second and Poland in third. This pattern, even if it's from a small sample size, tells us that our analysis was correct and we're slowly coming to a consensus, that being that the US is leading by a long shot at all fronts. The last question was more of a personal one. It's more about who the community supports, not really a realistic scenario, but even then the pattern is still followed, this time with South Korea in first, the United States in second, and Canada and Germany at third. These questions have really helped us deeper understand the community's perception on who they think the country filled with the best players is. Putting everything we have covered together, like the different top players from other game modes, the Osu World Cups, tournament earnings, and even what the community thinks, we come to the general consensus that the United States subjectively comes in first place as the strongest nation in Osu, with some of the best players this game has ever seen.